June 21, 2026. Somewhere beneath the granite and limestone mountains of central Iran, a few kilometers outside the holy city of Qom, the tunnels of Fordow still exist. American bombs struck here 1 year ago. The question the entire world is still asking: did those bombs finish the job? Welcome to OkSammu. I'm your anchor, and tonight we're doing what we do best, cutting through the official statements, the diplomatic language, and the carefully managed press releases. 20-second your times.
The tension between Iran and America is reaching a whole new level, and the world is divided. But the real question is, who do you stand with? America has official live voting open right now to see where the public support lies. If you love America and want to show your support, go to the description or the pinned comment right now. If you are using an Android, click the Android link, and if you are on an iPhone, click the iOS link. Just complete the quick 1-minute verification to make your vote count officially, and let's show the strength of America. Go vote now.
To tell you exactly what is happening, why it matters, and what comes next. Sit tight, because this one connects more dots than you might expect. The strike that changed everything. In June of 2025, the United States military executed one of the most technically ambitious airstrikes in modern history. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, flying from classified staging locations under layers of aerial refueling and electronic deception support, penetrated Iranian airspace and dropped the GBU-57 massive Ordnance Penetrator on Fordow. Each of these bombs weighs 30,000 pounds. They are specifically engineered to punch through dozens of meters of reinforced concrete and solid rock before detonating, sending catastrophic overpressure waves through underground tunnel networks. The supporting strike package included Tomahawk cruise missiles, targeting surface radar and air defense systems to suppress Iranian response windows. The operation was surgical in its planning, overwhelming in its execution, and deeply consequential in its aftermath. Surface infrastructure at Fordow was devastated. Access shafts were collapsed. Key operational areas inside the facility sustained severe blast damage. For a brief window after the strikes, Western intelligence agencies assessed that Iran's most hardened nuclear program had been significantly set back. But that assessment came with a critical asterisk. The deepest chambers, the levels designed precisely to survive strikes of this magnitude, were not fully neutralized. Iranian engineers and nuclear scientists, many of them with decades of institutional knowledge embedded in their training, were not killed. Program documentation had been dispersed. Physical assets had been relocated in the preceding months as tensions escalated. When the smoke cleared over the Zagros foothills, Iran had suffered a serious wound, but not a fatal one. That distinction matters enormously, and today, 1 year later, the satellite imagery tells a story that Washington has not been eager to amplify publicly. What the satellites are seeing. Commercial satellite operators, the same ones that have democratized strategic intelligence and made open-source analysis a legitimate field of geopolitical study, have been capturing consistent activity around the former Fordow site and its surrounding mountain approaches for months. Vehicle convoys, construction equipment, what appear to be new ventilation and access shaft projects at locations deeper and more dispersed than the original facility footprint. Independent analysts monitoring these feeds have identified tunneling activity in adjacent mountainous terrain, projects that, by their apparent scale and depth, seem designed to exceed the protection levels of Fordow itself. This is the classic offense-defense arms race playing out in real time. The United States demonstrated the reach of its bunker-penetrating capability. Iran responded by hardening further, going deeper, and dispersing more aggressively. The GBU-57 set a new benchmark. Iran is now engineering around that benchmark. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency has continued issuing carefully worded updates, noting that knowledge retention among Iranian nuclear scientists remained intact after the strikes. In arms control terms, this is the uncomfortable truth that kinetic solutions to proliferation challenges have always struggled with. You can destroy a building, but you cannot destroy expertise. You can collapse a tunnel, but you cannot erase a formula. The scientists are alive. The knowledge is intact. The program is reconstituting. Deeper, more dispersed, and potentially more difficult to target than before. Stay with OkSammu. We'll keep tracking every development as this situation unfolds. If you're not already subscribed, hit that button now and turn on notifications. This channel exists to connect the dots that the mainstream coverage misses. The Strait of Hormuz, where nuclear shadows meet energy markets. Here is where the Iran nuclear file stops being a regional story and becomes a global economic event. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most consequential maritime choke point on the planet. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply transits through a channel less than 40 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Every major Asian economy, China, Japan, South Korea, India, depends on energy shipments moving through this strait. Europe, still struggling to restructure its energy supply chains after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, cannot afford additional volatility from the Gulf. In the months following the Fordow strikes, Iran signaled, through a combination of official statements, proxy activities, and the positioning of its naval assets, that it retained the ability to threaten Hormuz shipping as a retaliatory lever. Iranian fast-boat squadrons conducted exercises near tanker lanes. Mines were assessed as pre-positioned. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy remained on elevated readiness. Commercial shipping operators did not need an actual incident to adjust their behavior. The mere credible threat was enough. Maritime insurance premiums for tankers transiting the Gulf spiked significantly. Several major operators began routing vessels on longer alternative paths around the Arabian Peninsula to avoid the strait entirely, adding days to delivery schedules and tens of thousands of dollars in additional fuel costs per voyage. Those costs flow through supply chains. They feed into manufacturing costs in Asia. They influence consumer energy prices in Europe. They affect the political calculus of governments from New Delhi to Brussels, all of whom were simultaneously trying to manage economic recoveries while watching the Middle East closely. The energy market connection also creates a fascinating and deeply uncomfortable dynamic with Russia. Moscow's war in Ukraine depends on commodity revenues. Russian oil and gas, despite sanctions, continues to find buyers at discounted prices through intermediary markets. If Hormuz tensions spike global oil prices, Russia paradoxically benefits from higher energy revenues, even as it faces Western economic pressure. This is the kind of systemic interconnection that strategic planners in Washington must account for when calibrating responses in the Gulf. Ukraine. The attrition continues. Turning to Eastern Europe, the war in Ukraine enters its fourth year in a state of grinding technological attrition that has fundamentally reshaped how military analysts think about sustained high-intensity conflict between near-peer adversaries. Russian forces have repositioned additional artillery units and drone squadrons along the Donbass front. Satellite observation has confirmed logistics movements conducted under electronic warfare cover. Russia has become significantly more sophisticated in masking its ground resupply operations from overhead surveillance. Ukrainian forces, equipped with advanced Western air defense systems, have maintained impressive intercept rates against incoming ballistic and cruise missile barrages, but sustained disruptions to power grid infrastructure have forced civilian conservation measures across multiple Ukrainian oblasts. The drone dimension deserves particular attention. Ukrainian strikes deep into Russian territory, targeting logistics hubs, airfield infrastructure, and fuel depots, have forced Moscow to divert substantial air defense resources away from the front lines to protect rear area facilities. This is a deliberate Ukrainian strategy, not just to damage Russian logistics, but to force resource allocation trade-offs that degrade Russian offensive capacity. Kremlin's strategy, meanwhile, appears oriented toward exhaustion, wearing down both Ukrainian resilience and Western political will through a prolonged engagement that outlasts NATO's public consensus on continued support. Internal NATO discussions, as reported by multiple European policy outlets, have reflected genuine concerns about the sustainability of current support packages and the risk of escalatory thresholds being crossed if long-range capability transfers continue to accelerate. The economic dimension ties back directly to the Middle East. European nations absorbing Ukrainian refugees, funding military support packages, and managing their own energy restructuring after the Russian supply cutoff cannot afford simultaneous Gulf energy volatility. Every percentage point spike in LNG prices from Hormuz uncertainty adds pressure to governments already navigating difficult domestic political environments. The South China Sea, controlled escalation. In the Indo-Pacific, Chinese naval assets have maintained assertive presence operations around disputed features in the South China Sea. Destroyer formations have conducted maneuvers near contested shoals and reefs. PLA aircraft have continued incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone at a pace that forces Taiwanese and U.S. forces into persistent, elevated alert states, a deliberate strategy designed to normalize proximity and stress opponent operational tempos over time. U.S. Navy assets have responded with freedom of navigation operations asserting passage rights through contested waters. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers have conducted transits that deliberately test response protocols and force Chinese forces to make real-time decisions about engagement thresholds. Virginia-class submarines provide subsurface deterrence, with U.S. Pacific Fleet commanders clearly calibrating their posture to signal resolve without providing pretexts for kinetic responses. The strategic connection to Hormuz is direct and significant. Any major disruption to energy flows through the Strait of Hormuz would affect fuel availability for naval operations across the globe, including in the Western Pacific. Military planners in Washington and Beijing have both run the calculations. Sustained carrier group operations in the South China Sea require continuous logistics chains that trace back through energy supply networks ultimately dependent on Gulf stability. A decision to escalate in one theater carries real costs in operational flexibility in others. Chinese strategists appear fully aware of this dynamic and have calibrated their South China Sea posture accordingly. Assertive enough to expand presence and test American commitment, restrained enough to avoid triggering unified opposition from Quad partners and regional allies who are watching the balance of power shift with increasing concern. The arms race in underground warfare. The Fordow strikes have crystallized a genuine technological arms race that extends well beyond Iran. Every major adversary capable of hardening critical facilities has taken careful note of the GBU-57's demonstrated performance and is investing accordingly in going deeper, dispersing more broadly, and building redundancy that raises the cost of any future kinetic targeting solution. North Korea's underground infrastructure, among the most extensive in the world, has been expanded significantly in recent years. Russian command facilities have undergone similar hardening investments. Chinese military planners have been integrating underground basing into their strategic force structure for decades. On the American side, the B-21 Raider program represents the next generation of penetrating strike capability, a platform designed to carry even more capable munitions against targets that B-2s could only partially neutralize. Potential further enhancements to the massive Ordnance Penetrator arsenal are reportedly under development, driven directly by the lessons of the Fordow operation and post-strike battle damage assessments. This is the eternal arms race of offense and defense. The same dynamic that drove the development of ICBM silos and the missiles designed to destroy them during the Cold War, now playing out in the domain of hardened underground facilities and precision-penetrating munitions. It has no endpoint, it only has phases. The real danger: escalation chains. What keeps the analysts most concerned, what the classified threat assessments circulating through Western intelligence communities consistently identify as the scenario most likely to produce catastrophic outcomes, is not a deliberate, planned escalation. It is an accidental one. The naval traffic around Hormuz involves multiple nations' military and commercial vessels operating in close proximity with overlapping communication systems, competing rules of engagement, and sensor networks that, under stress, can misidentify contacts. A U.S. destroyer tracking what appears to be an Iranian fast boat approaching a tanker it is escorting. An IRGC radar operator watching an approaching aircraft that their system cannot positively identify. A Taiwanese air defense network tracking PLA aircraft that crosses an internal threshold without warning. Any of these scenarios can initiate exchange sequences that move faster than decision-making chains can manage, where the next response is already underway before the previous action has been fully assessed. Military command centers in Washington, Tehran, Beijing, and Moscow have all run extensive simulations of these scenarios. They recognize the danger, but they also understand, in their honest private assessments, that simulations and real-world conditions involving drone swarms, cyber interference, and proxy networks operating with partial autonomy are fundamentally different environments. The danger is real. The awareness of the danger is also real. The question is whether awareness translates to restraint at the critical moment. What? The bottom line. 1 year after the deepest American strike in modern history, here is where we stand. Fordow was damaged but not destroyed. Iran's nuclear knowledge survived. Reconstitution is underway, deeper and more dispersed. The Strait of Hormuz remains a loaded pressure point that connects Iranian strategic calculations to global energy markets, Russian war finance, and Indo-Pacific naval posture in ways that create systemic risk far beyond any individual incident. Ukraine's war continues to reshape how modern militaries think about sustained attrition, drone warfare, and the political endurance required to prosecute or resist prolonged conflicts. China watches every development in every theater, calibrating its own moves with the careful patience of a power that believes time is on its side. What emerged from the past 12 months is a strategic landscape defined by managed instability, where every major actor is simultaneously deterring, probing, and avoiding the thresholds that could trigger uncontrolled escalation. It is an extraordinarily demanding environment for policymakers, military planners, and the open-source analysts who track it all in real time. OkSammu will be here, tracking the satellite imagery, reading the diplomatic signals, and connecting these dots every step of the way. If this analysis gave you something that the mainstream coverage missed, subscribe to OkSammu right now. Hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's actually happening in the world. We publish this kind of depth regularly, and you don't want to miss what comes next.